Before we dive in, drop a quick hi in the comments. It may seem small, but trust me, it really helps YouTube share this story with more sci-fi fans like us. I'd love to see who's watching.
The third extraction spike tore through the captive's cranial ports. Dark arterial fluid drifted across the chamber's containment field. The contractor was wrong about the stars, the Vithara Syndicate's senior acquisition director said. The captive hung suspended in a restraint frame designed for long-duration neural harvest. Limbs extended, cranial nodes embedded at the base of the skull, optical membranes clouded from overstimulation. He had not been enslaved. He had been retained. A contract astrophysicist, independent, mid-tier, not politically aligned with any major power. The kind of scientist who sold anomaly reports and emerging technologies to trade consortiums for the highest bidder and believed data was neutral. The syndicate funded dozens like him. Research grants, quiet patronage, anonymous capital. Discoveries were assets. Assets were leverage. Leverage became power. Above the extraction frame, the original report rotated in projection. Alcyone binary. Harmonic anomaly. Statistically noisy. Recommendation: no commercial application. The director studied it without expression. Check again. The analyst initiated a second verification pass. Rerunning harmonic isolation at deep spectrum resonance, he said. The lattice pulsed again, and the harmonic data the astrophysicist had dismissed as turbulence stabilized. The irregular shear patterns aligned. The noise repeated. And when something repeats, it is no longer noise. A scream tore from the captive's throat, thin, involuntary, mechanical, and died as the lattice stabilized and the holographic field above the platform flickered into coherence. Gravitational shear maps, stellar rotation models, resonance harmonics. The twin suns rotated in opposing directions in the projection, amber and white spheres locked in gravitational opposition. The model recalculated in real time as more data was stripped from the captive's cortex. A line appeared between them, then it thickened, then it stabilized. The analyst continued. Compression symmetry confirmed. The director looked at the data. The AI reran the dataset. Noise filters removed, reintroduced, removed again. The pattern remained. Stable, periodic, hidden only because no one had been looking for profit. The corridor snapped into full resolution. A compression channel, narrow, periodic, stable for 4.7 standard hours every cycle. A naturally occurring gravitational slip corridor, invisible unless mapped at deep spectrum resonance frequencies. The captive convulsed as the extraction reached his final cache. His cortical recall showed confusion, uncertainty, statistical dismissal. He had never modeled it for transit. He had never simulated vector alignment. He had never seen the corridor. The syndicate had. Run transit simulation, the director said. The projection shifted. A standard cargo hauler model entered the corridor at calculated vector alignment. Velocity increased. Drive output decreased. Transit time between 11 adjacent trade systems recalculated. 63.4% reduction. Fuel consumption negligible during corridor phase. No FTL burn required across the compression segment. The chamber went still. The director's voice was careful. He labeled it as turbulence. Yes, the analyst replied. Run economic projection. Numbers filled the air. Freight monopolization curves. Trade route redirection models. Competitive collapse simulations. Revenue projections across 40 cycles. 3.2 trillion credits in leverage. Control of corridor entry node required. The entry node pulsed on the display. Elysium 7, a human retirement colony. Population, 412. Orbital defense, none. Military registry, none. Galactic Council protection status, civilian. The captive's vital signs flattened. The extraction lattice powered down. The director did not look at the body. He never understood, the analyst said quietly. No, the director replied, but we needed to be certain. He turned toward the projection of the twin suns rotating in perfect opposition. Council Clause 14.7. The analyst accessed the legal framework. Any isolated civilian colony without orbital defense, rendered non-functional and unclaimed within the arbitration window, may be placed under commercial hold by an external party. Survivors invalidate arbitration, the analyst said. Yes. The director watched the corridor pulse in perfect periodic rhythm. The colony must be removed. Deploy kinetic suppression, he ordered. Follow with ground verification. Confirm 0 survivors. The projection shifted from gravitational harmonics to orbital targeting geometry. 3 ships adjusted formation. Below them, on a world engineered for beauty, 5 old men argued about cards under twin sun light. The first kinetic rod entered atmosphere. 30 minutes later, the Commons building was gone. 43 survivors were in the tunnels, and 12 syndicate soldiers were dead in an orchard. Present time. The second sweep team entered atmosphere. In the tunnels beneath the orchard, they were already planning for it. Rollins had been standing at the schematic, one-armed and calculating. They'll send more this time. The first 12 going silent will trigger an escalation response. 24 is standard for a second wave when a first wave fails to report. They'll also change their approach. Wider formation, overlapping fields of fire, combat-ready weapons. They won't be walking and expecting body counts. But they'll still go to the orchard, Mrs. Smith said. She was back on her cable spool by the entrance, knitting bag in her lap, mirror back inside it. Her hands were steady, but her face was drawn. She had watched 12 beings die from 30 feet away through a ventilation grate, and the fact that she had written scenes like it 100 times did not make it the same as seeing it. They have to. Their first team went in there and didn't come out. They need to know what happened before they can continue the sweep. She's right, Rollins said. The second team will enter the orchard, find the bodies, and try to establish what killed them. While they're doing that, they'll be standing in the lower quadrant, which is where the bodies are, which is where the irrigation main runs. We flood it, Cray said. Collapse the irrigation main from below. A recall team can cut it from the maintenance access. Knee-deep in 30 seconds. Waist-deep in 2 minutes. And in that water, in the chaos, with the drones running interference overhead, Terrence said, they won't be looking for a man in a wheelchair behind a burned tree. There it was. The plan had a shape. First engagement to break the second team's cohesion. Irrigation flood to pin them. And in the confusion, one man, sitting still in the one place no one would look for a threat, waiting for a single soldier to come close enough. They said it. Tarrant positioned himself 30 minutes before the second dropship was expected. He took his wheelchair through the eastern tunnel access into the orchard's upper quadrant, above the floodline, behind a collapsed retaining wall, where a row of ornamental apple trees had been that morning, and were now charcoal pillars. The position was deliberate, slightly elevated, sheltered, with a clear sightline to the lower orchard where the bodies of the first sweep team lay in the ash. He draped a blanket over his legs. He lowered his chin to his chest. He closed his eyes. To anyone approaching, he was debris. An old man in a wheelchair, abandoned in the chaos of the bombardment, slumped and still. The most pitiful thing on the battlefield. The thing you walk past. The thing you scan, dismiss, and log as another casualty in a colony full of casualties. The Whitfield pulsimeter was live under his left hand. The ceramic blade, his own, from a career that predated the wheelchair by 20 years, rested beneath the blanket across his thigh. He waited. Ash was 30 meters behind him, in a drainage ditch that ran along the orchard's upper boundary, invisible, motionless, waiting for the moment after Tarrant's moment. At 1950 colony local time, The second dropship landed. Mrs. Smith counted them from a new grate, 50 meters from her first position. 24 soldiers. Wider formation, just as Rollins predicted. Weapons at ready. They moved into the orchard in 3 staggered lines, covering each other, scanners on combat resolution. 2 flashes from the mirror. Cray received the signal. He waited. Timing was the architecture now. Let them find the bodies. Let them stop. Let them cluster around the dead and try to understand what had happened, because the instinct to understand is the instinct that pins you in place, and pinned is what he needed them to be. The 24 soldiers found the first team's bodies in the lower orchard. They stopped. They scanned. They reported. For 90 seconds, they were stationary, focused downward, trying to reconcile what their scanners showed. 12 dead soldiers, killed by a combination of industrial shrapnel and close-quarters cutting implements, with an intelligence briefing that said this colony contained nothing more dangerous than elderly humans and medical drones. Cray gave the order through the hardline tunnel network. The irrigation main beneath grid section 4 collapsed. Not from damage, from a deliberate cut, made by one of the recalled operatives with a plasma torch from the maintenance bay. 2 million liters of treated water released into the lower orchard through fractured pipes that turned the ash-covered ground into a rising flood in seconds. Knee-deep in 30 seconds. Waist-deep in 2 minutes. On a Vishari body, tall, segmented, with thorax joints that seized when submerged. It was immobilizing. They couldn't run. They couldn't kneel. They stood in rising water that gripped their armor at the joints and held them the way a fist holds a throat. The drones came back. The remaining fragmentation units screaming in at head height through the smoke. The laser-equipped scooters, piloted by old hands that shook on the handlebars but didn't shake on the trigger, cutting through the chaos with beams that found the gaps in armor where the water had forced the joints open. But the upper orchard was not flooded. And in the upper orchard, behind the collapsed retaining wall, Hugh Tarrant sat in his wheelchair with his eyes closed and waited. The flood drove 3 soldiers uphill. Standard survival response. Move to higher ground when the terrain turns against you. They came through the charcoal tree line at a staggering run, water streaming from their armor joints, sensors flickering from the drone assault, pulse lances firing wild into the smoke in the direction of threats they couldn't see clearly. The first 2 passed Tarrant's position at 6 meters. They didn't look. Debris, old man, wheelchair, nothing. Civilian expansion zone. Population too old for combat, one said quietly. Acquisition should have been fast. The first team never reported. Something went wrong. Arbitration window closes in 48 hours, the other replied. Secure the site. File the report. The third one stopped. This soldier was more careful than the others, or more frightened, or both. He was scanning the upper orchard with a visor that was cracked but still partially functional, and his scanner flagged the wheelchair, a metallic object with an active power cell, sitting motionless against the retaining wall in a position that didn't match any colony infrastructure profile. Anomaly. Worth investigating. He approached. Pulse lance raised. Forearms configured for a combat posture. Upper pair on the weapon, lower pair free, one reaching for the scanner on his belt to get a cleaner reading. He moved toward the wheelchair, the way a soldier moves toward something that is probably nothing but might be something, which is to say, weapon up, weight forward, every sense straining. 3 meters. Tarrant could hear the chemical tang of the Vishari atmosphere recycler in the armor's neck seal, the hiss of the rebreather, the faint, high-pitched whine of a cracked visor trying to auto-repair. 2 meters. The soldier leaned in, close enough to see, through the cracked visor, an old man in a wheelchair, blanket over his legs, chin on his chest, eyes closed, breathing slow. The soldier's posture changed, the weapon lowered 2 degrees. Not much, just enough. The categorization had been made. Casualty. Non-threat. Log and move on. He reached for his belt scanner with his lower left hand. Tarrant opened the recessed panel. The Whitfield pulse emitter fired a single electromagnetic burst, focused, tight beam, 3 meters of effective range. It was not a weapon in any legal or technical classification. It was a tool designed for disrupting hostile electronics during boarding operations. It had been standard issue for Terran Corridor Authority combat engineers for 11 years before being decommissioned and replaced by a newer model. Tarrant's unit was the older model. It worked the same. The soldiers' helmet systems died. Every display inside the visor went to static. The navigation feeds, the tactical overlay, the targeting assist, gone. But the critical failure was the neural balance regulators in the neck assembly. Vishari equilibrium was maintained by a pair of fluid-filled organs behind the skull plate, and the suit's regulators compensated for the disorientation that rapid movement caused in those organs. When the regulators fed garbage data instead of compensation, the organs received conflicting signals about the body's position in space. The soldier staggered. His forearms went wide, grasping at air that wasn't where his nervous system said it was. His pulse lance dropped. His knees began to fold under him as his equilibrium collapsed. For 4 seconds, 3, maybe 4, Tarrant counted them the way he counted detonation timers. The soldier was a creature with no sense of up or down, no sight, no hearing, trapped inside armor that had become a sensory deprivation chamber. He lurched forward, overcorrecting, pitching toward the only stable mass in reach. Tarrant's right hand came out from under the blanket. The blade went into the neck seal, the gap between helmet and thorax plate. The soldier dropped. The pulse lance clattered against the wheelchair's footrest. The body settled into the ash without sound. Tarrant did not look at the body. He looked at the helmet. It was intact. The visor was cracked from the earlier drone assault, but the temple housing, the left side, where the comm module sat, was undamaged. The crystalline wafer inside would be clean. "Ash," Tarrant said. Not loud, just enough to carry 30 meters. Ash was already moving. He came out of the drainage ditch at a pace that looked unhurried and covered the distance in a time that contradicted the appearance. He knelt beside the body. His hands, calloused, efficient, familiar with this kind of work in the way that a surgeon's hands are familiar with anatomy, removed the helmet in 9 seconds. He checked the temple housing, unopened, undamaged. "Clean," Ash said. He placed the helmet in the wheelchair's cargo basket. Tarrant picked up the dead soldier's pulse lance, laid it across his lap, the first actual weapon any of them had held since the bombardment, and turned his wheelchair toward the nearest tunnel access. Behind them, the lower orchard was silent. The water was settling. The drones had returned to their holding patterns. The second sweep team would never file a report. In the junction room, Henner took the helmet from the cargo basket and set it on the utility table beside his comm unit. He opened the temple housing with his multi-tool. Inside, the Vishari crystalline comm wafer caught the amber emergency light and scattered it in prismatic fragments across the concrete ceiling. He touched the crystal with the tip of a probe. No fracture lines, no stress marks. Clean lattice structure, intact frequency synthesizer, functional power amplifier rated at approximately 800 times the output of his civilian unit. "This will work," he said. He began the splice. Vishari crystalline architecture into human circuit pathways. The power amplifier wired into his comm unit's transmission stage, bypassing the civilian output limiter that had kept his Sunday calls to his daughter at a polite, legal, unremarkable signal strength. The frequency synthesizer reprogrammed, not to Vithara Syndicate tactical channels, but to Terran military emergency bands. Band 7. The frequency that Dagger Point Station's automated monitoring systems were required to flag, acknowledge, and escalate within 90 seconds of receipt. His hands moved with the steady, unhurried precision of a man who had spent 3 decades building, modifying, and exploiting communication systems in conditions that ranged from uncomfortable to actively lethal. A tunnel beneath a burning retirement colony was, by Henner's professional standards, somewhere in the middle. "How long?" Cray asked. "The splice takes 20 minutes. After that, I need surface access. The tunnels will interfere with the signal. I need elevation and a clear eastern horizon. Dagger Point's position at this hour puts it just above the ecliptic plane." Henner adjusted the half-seated crystal wafer. "From down here, I can transmit," he said. "But I won't know if it clears the rock. Military arrays can punch down through bedrock. This splice can't punch up the same way." "You'll have it." 20 minutes. They had 20 minutes before the next phase, and in those 20 minutes, the only thing that mattered was the work Henner's hands were doing on a utility table in a concrete room beneath the ruins of a place that had been, that morning, the most beautiful colony in the Fringe. Mrs. Smith watched him work. She watched the way she had always watched, with the patient, absorptive attention of a woman who understood that the most important details were always in the hands. What a character held, how they held it, whether their fingers trembled. Henner's didn't. In orbit, the Vithara Syndicate flagship registered the loss of 36 ground troops in 2 engagements. The telemetry data was absolute, 36 green markers, now gray. 2 full sweep teams deployed to a retirement colony classified as a zero-threat civilian target, and not one soldier had transmitted a coherent report before going silent. The fleet's response was not immediate. It was calculated. The Syndicate had not achieved its position by reacting emotionally to tactical surprises. But the calculation led to an uncomfortable conclusion. The ground approach had failed. The survivors were organized, and every minute the operation continued without confirmation of total elimination was a minute closer to someone outside this system asking questions about why a Vithara Syndicate fleet was in orbit above a human colony world. The flagship began charging its main battery for a secondary orbital strike. In the tunnel, Henner felt it before any instrument confirmed it. A faint electromagnetic shift in the ambient field, the kind of shift that a Vithara capital ship's main battery produced during its charging cycle, and that a man who had spent 9 theaters of operation listening to alien ships power up their weapons recognized the way a musician recognizes a note. He looked up from the splice. "They're charging the main battery," he said. "They're going to glass the site from orbit." Cray looked at him. "How long on the charge cycle?" "Vithara capital ships run a 15-minute cycle from charge initiation to firing solution. I felt the initiation pulse about a minute ago. We have 14 minutes, maybe less." "How long on the transmitter?" Henner looked at the splice, at the half-connected crystal wafer, and the exposed circuit pathways and the work that remained. 5 minutes to complete the splice, then I need surface access to aim and transmit." The math was simple. The math was also the kind of simple that killed people. Cray looked at the room, at the 5 faces looking back at him, at Mrs. Smith on her cable spool, at Tarrant in his wheelchair with a dead soldier's pulse lance across his lap, at Rollins, one-armed and pale and thinking, at Ash, leaning on the doorframe with ash on his clothes and nothing in his eyes that looked like doubt, at Henner, whose hands had not stopped moving on the splice, because Poke Henner did not stop working on a transmission when the clock was running. Not for briefings, not for incoming fire, not for the end of the world. You finished the build, and you sent the signal. Everything else was someone else's problem. "Finish it," Cray said. "We go up the moment it's ready." Henner's hands moved. The crystal seeded into the circuit pathway. The amplifier connections closed. The frequency synthesizer locked onto band 7. The flagship charged above them. The tunnel hummed. The transmitter was ready. Henner pulled the last connector tight, tested the join with his thumb, and looked up. One nod. Cray didn't hesitate. "Tarrant, point. Henner behind him. Mrs. Smith, center. I'll take rear. Tunnel 7 to the orchard surface hatch." "Before we go up," Tarrant said, voice low. in the orchard, when the first two passed me. I heard them. Cray turned slightly. And? They didn't see me as a threat, called it a civilian expansion zone, said acquisition should have been fast. He paused. Then one said the arbitration window closes in 48 hours. The other told him to secure the site and file the report. Rollins' head lifted. Repeat that. Arbitration window closes in 48 hours. Secure the site. File the report. Rollins stared past Tarrant, not at the tunnel, but somewhere much older. Council Clause 14.7, he said. If a civilian colony becomes non-functional and remains unclaimed within the arbitration window, external parties may petition commercial custodianship. Cray watched him. Meaning? Henner frowned. Non-functional. Dead, Rollins said, or legally indistinguishable from it. Silence settled. Ash spoke without looking at anyone. They don't need survivors. But this is a retirement colony. What's worth that risk? Rollins' gaze sharpened. They don't glass planets for paperwork. Cray watched him. Rollins shook his head once. It's not about the colony. Cray's eyes shifted between them. They wipe the surface, he said. Then they file. Rollins nodded once. They don't need occupation forces. They need absence. Henner adjusted the transmitter strap across his chest. And if the surface is sterilized before we transmit, there's no record of resistance, no counterclaim, just a destroyed colony. Cray looked toward the hatch. Then we make a record. Rollins, Ash, stay below. Keep the 43 alive. If we don't come back, you don't come looking. Rollins nodded. He understood the math. 2 assets in reserve meant the civilians still had protection if the surface party got erased. He gave a short nod and stepped back into the dark. Ash simply checked the captured sidearm, turned, and walked toward the deeper junction where the survivors were sheltered. Tarrant rolled forward. The wheelchair's modified treads gripped the tunnel's corrugated flooring with a low grinding sound. The captured Vishari pulse lance lay across his lap, barrel angled forward, his hands resting on it the way other men rested hands on armrests. He'd field-modified the lance's grip assembly with electrical tape and a section of wheelchair armrest foam so it would seat against a human shoulder. It was crude work. Tarrant's work was always crude. It was also always functional, which was the only metric that had ever mattered to him across 4 decades of making machines do violent things in places where supply chains didn't exist. He led them up the incline toward the Tunnel 7 hatch, and the air changed as they climbed, colder, thinner, carrying the chemical smell of what the bombardment had done to the topsoil. Tunnel 7 had been designed as a perimeter maintenance exit, 70 meters from the old water tower, cut into the ridgeline to service irrigation feeds. The tunnel walls were sweating condensation. Somewhere above them, ruptured water mains were bleeding into the substrate, and the moisture was finding its way down through cracks the bombardment had opened in the colony's infrastructure layer. Henners followed him with the transmitter unit strapped across his chest, a grotesque hybrid of Terran civilian hardware and the crystalline guts of a Vishari comm wafer, held together with solder and field tape, and the kind of engineering that only worked when someone understood signals the way a surgeon understood anatomy. Mrs. Smith kept the pace. Her hand was inside her coat pocket. Her face showed nothing. Cray came last, oxygen unit clipped to his side, the soft mechanical tick marking each breath. Tarrant reached up and unlatched the surface hatch. The hydraulics were dead, no power, so he forced it with his arms, the muscles in his shoulders cording as the plate groaned open. Pale light fell into the tunnel, gray sky, ash particulate drifting like snow. What had been the eastern residential quarter was gone, not destroyed in the way a building is destroyed, dismantled at the molecular level. Where there had been homes, streets, the community center where Mrs. Smith had attended Thursday Bridge, There was now a shallow depression of fused glass andite. The bombardment's footprint was precise, surgical if surgery were performed with a hammer. The air above the impact zone shimmered with residual thermal energy, and the ground crunched underfoot with the sound of walking on broken teeth. Nothing organic remained. Not a tree. Not a blade of grass. Tarrant rolled out first. The wheelchair's treads crunched on debris. He swept the pulse lance across a 90-degree arc, left to right, slow, methodical. Clear to the tower. No movement, Tarrant said. They moved. The water tower stood at the colony's eastern edge. It had survived the bombardment because it was infrastructure. Metal and concrete, no residential value, no population density. The syndicate's targeting algorithms had categorized it as irrelevant, as they had with other things in this colony. Henner reached the tower's access ladder. He looked up. 20 meters to the maintenance platform. He slung the transmitter tighter, gripped the first rung, and started climbing without breaking stride. Cray positioned himself at the tower's base, sight lines covering the western approach. Tarrant angled his chair behind a concrete water main junction. The pulse lance trained north. Mrs. Smith stood in the shadow of the tower's support column, very quiet. Henner climbed. The ladder rungs were cold and gritty with ash. His fingers found rhythm. Grip, step, pull, grip, step, pull. 20 meters is not a long climb for a young man. Henner was 67 years old, had a replaced left knee, and was carrying 11 kilograms of jury-rigged transmitter equipment. His left knee sent a sharp, specific complaint up his thigh with every step. The titanium joint didn't like cold, didn't like load-bearing lateral movement, didn't like any of this. He reached the halfway mark in 30 seconds. The last 10 meters cost him more than the first 10. When he reached the platform, he didn't pause to catch his breath. There was no time for breath. The platform grating was buckled in 2 places from bombardment concussion, and he had to brace his feet carefully to maintain stable footing. He swung the transmitter onto the platform grating, oriented the hybrid antenna toward the eastern horizon, and powered the unit. The Vishari crystalline wafer hummed, a thin, glassy sound, alien and precise. The Terran components around it buzzed and crackled with the effort of handling frequencies they'd never been designed to carry. A hairline fracture ran through the wafer's secondary resonance layer, damage from the splice. Henner watched it for 2 seconds. If the fracture propagated during transmission, the wafer would shatter and the signal would die mid-burst. There was nothing he could do about it. He transmitted anyway. Henner's fingers moved across the interface, sealing the channel. 30 seconds. That was the minimum. 10 to transmit the burst, compressed, hard, clean. 20 to hold position and listen for the automated relay bounce from Dagger Point's monitoring array. 15 would push the signal into space. 15 wouldn't tell him whether anyone had heard it. 30 gave him confirmation. If the bounce came back, the signal had entered Terran military chain. If it didn't, he didn't finish the thought. He opened Band 7, Terran military emergency, and transmitted. The transmission was not a speech. It was not a plea. It was a compressed military-grade data burst containing the following. The signal contained 2 data packets compressed into a burst transmission of 1.7 seconds. The first packet was a standard Terran distress header, colony identification, coordinates, timestamp, threat classification. The second was a personnel manifest of Elysium 7, 412 names, with a status flag on each one, and a single declarative line appended to the end of the burst, written by Henner in plain military language with no adjectives and no ambiguity. This is extermination protocol, active against Terran civilian population. 43 confirmed survivors. Orbital strike imminent. Respond. The transmission ended. Henner held the antenna steady. Listening. 10 seconds of silence. Then the math started closing in on him. The charge cycle. How long? How many seconds remained between this moment and the moment the sky turned white? 12 seconds. 15. At 20 seconds, the receiver caught a signal. Faint, attenuated by distance and interference, but structured. An automated response on Band 7, a relay acknowledgement from a military monitoring buoy in Dagger Point's outer sensor network. Not a human response. Not yet. Just a machine, doing what it was built to do, confirming that a signal had been received on an emergency frequency and was being forwarded up the chain. The bounce code was clean. "Got it," Henner said. "Poke. Down. Now," Cray said. Henner was already on the ladder, descending faster than his knees wanted and slower than the situation demanded. 312 kilometers above Elysium 7, the Syndicate flagship's communications officer detected the burst. The signal was unmistakable, a tight beam transmission on a frequency that did not belong to any Vishari system, cutting through the electromagnetic distortion of the orbital battery's charge cycle with unnatural precision. The communications officer reported to his superior. The bridge reported to Tactical Overseer, who stood at the center of the command deck, watching the battery's charge indicator climb toward completion. A signal had left the colony surface, Terran origin, military emergency frequency, outbound vector into open void. "Deploy fast assault shuttle," the Overseer said. "Intercept and eliminate the signal source, immediately." The shuttle launched 60 seconds after the transmission ended. It cut into atmosphere on a direct descent vector toward the water tower, engines flaring white through ash-gray cloud. On the ground, they were halfway across the 70 meters when the first flare burned through the sky. "They've seen it," Henner said. "I know," Cray answered. "Move." The shuttle dropped lower, nose angling toward the tower platform where the signal had originated. 30 meters to the hatch. Terrence stopped. He pivoted the chair in one smooth motion and brought the captured Vishari Pulse lance up against the reinforced armrest mount he had modified in the tunnels. The grip fit now. Crude. Functional. He didn't aim for the hull. He aimed for the drive bloom. He fired. The Pulse struck the shuttle's starboard intake at the exact moment its stabilization thrusters adjusted for terminal alignment. Alien energy met alien shielding. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the intake flared wrong. The shuttle's descent vector snapped sideways. Correction thrusters fired hard to compensate. The craft lurched left, then jerked sharply right, overcorrecting. Its nose dipped, surged up, dipped again. What had been a clean, surgical descent fractured into jagged angles, short, violent lateral snaps across the ridgeline as opposing thrusters fought to rebalance the vector. It wasn't falling. Stabilization was gone. The shuttle zigzagged through its own exhaust plume, engines screaming as control systems battled each other instead of tracking the tower. It did not crash, but it was no longer executing a precise strike. "Seconds. Underground," Cray said. Tarrant reversed and drove for the hatch. They reached it as the shuttle roared overhead. Tarrant dropped down the incline first, braking hard against the wheel rims. Henner followed. Mrs. Smith went next, steady, one hand on the rail. Cray came last and sealed the hatch behind them. They were 30 meters underground when the sky turned white. The orbital battery fired. It was not like thunder. Thunder is a sound the human brain has a category for. This was something else, a frequency below sound, below vibration, a compression of atmosphere and geology that the body registered not through the ears, but through the skeleton. The bones knew before the mind did. The kinetic package struck the colony's central grid with a force that turned surface structures into light. For a fraction of a second, Elysium 7 had a second sun, a white-hot column slamming into the settlement core with the violence of a contained asteroid strike. The colony plate, 3 meters of reinforced foundation, did not shatter cleanly. It failed in sections. Surface levels vaporized. Structural layers beneath it collapsed inward. Below that, The geological substrate absorbed the rest, fracturing along stress lines, but holding where it was deepest. The tunnels held. They held because the engineers who built them had designed for seismic events on a young crust terraformed world, and the math that resists tectonic shifting also resists orbital bombardment at depth. 30 meters below, in the maintenance tunnel network, the world ended, and then did not. The shockwave hit the tunnels like a fist inside a pipe. The air itself became a weapon, a wall of overpressure that slammed through every corridor and junction, carrying dust and debris and heat. The sound was physical, a single percussive event so loud it bypassed the eardrums and hit the brain directly. Cray was thrown sideways into the tunnel wall. His shoulder struck corrugated steel, and something cracked. Rib or panel, he couldn't tell, and didn't care. He curled around his center of gravity and rode it out the way he'd ridden out things before, in places he'd never named to anyone. Terrence's wheelchair slammed backward. He'd braced, hands locked on the wheels, body low, but the overpressure was beyond what bracing could manage. The chair hit the wall behind him, and the impact drove the breath from his lungs in a single explosive grunt. The pulse lance clattered off his lap and skidded down the tunnel into darkness. Henner was on the ground. He'd dropped flat when the first tremor hit. Transmitter clutched to his chest like a child. The ceiling above him groaned, a deep, structural sound, the voice of metal and stone being asked to hold more than they were designed to hold. Dust fell. Then chunks. A section of ceiling panel buckled downward, stopping 6 inches above his back, held by a single bent support strut. Mrs. Smith was against the wall. She'd gone down with her arms over her head. The position they'd taught in the colony emergency drills, the ones everyone attended once and then forgot about. She hadn't forgotten. Her coat was covered in powdered concrete. Her ears were ringing. She couldn't see. The dust was absolute, a solid wall of gray particulate that turned the tunnel into the inside of a lung. The lights were gone. The emergency strips, the junction markers, the faint green glow of the environmental monitors, all dead. The EMP had killed the tunnel's electronics too, and the shockwave had done the rest. Darkness. Complete. The kind of darkness that has weight. For 7 seconds, no one moved. No one spoke. The tunnel creaked and settled around them, small sounds of structural complaint, metal contracting, stone shifting, dust sifting down in whispered curtains. Then Cray's voice, raw and flat in the dark. Sound off. Henner. Functional. Tarrant. Intact. A pause. Dust moved. Mrs. Smith. I'm here. Cray exhaled. It was the only concession to relief he would make. 4 voices. The other 2, Rollins and Ash, were deeper in the network, 3 junctions south with the 43. The shockwave would have hit those corridors too. There was no way to know if the deeper sections had held. No way to know if the ceiling had come down on 90-year-old civilians huddled in the dark. No comms, no line of sight. Just silence from the deeper tunnels. And silence could mean anything. Cray filed it. There was nothing he could do about it now. Henner. Transmission status. Burst completed before the strike. It's an open void. Light speed propagation. There is nothing they can do to recall it. The sentence hung in the dark like a verdict. Tarrant found a chemical light in his chair's side pouch. Terran made. No electronics. Just a glass tube and a chemical reaction. He cracked it. Pale green light bloomed in the tunnel, painting their faces in the color of things that grow in places without sun. They waited. Henner sat with his back against the wall, with the transmitter in his lap. He had not put it down. The crystal still pulsed, drawing residual power from the Vishari power cell, listening on band 7 with the patience of a machine that didn't know what else to do. He thought about his daughter. He would call her on Sunday, Dot. The comm unit was fused with alien crystal, and its civilian functions were probably destroyed. But he would find a way. He always found a way. That was the point. Mrs. Smith sat against the tunnel wall and held her knitting needles in the dark. The bag was empty now. The mirror had been dropped somewhere on the surface. The blade and the thimble-sized EMP charge pressed cold against the lining of her coat. All she had left were 2 No. 4 needles, and the memory of a scarf she'd been making for no one in particular on an afternoon that felt like it belonged to a different lifetime. The only sound now was Cray's oxygen concentrator, clicking, steady. They waited for hours in a dark tunnel beneath a world that no longer existed above them, and they waited the way old people wait, with the patience of those who have learned that time passes whether you fight it or not. "Will they come?" Mrs. Smith's voice broke the silence. Henner looked at the device, at the receiver indicator, a small LED he'd wired into the circuit as a signal monitor. It glowed a faint amber, listening, waiting. "The signal hit Daggerpoint's monitoring array," he said. "I got the relay bounce. That means it's in the system. Band 7 distress calls trigger a mandatory response protocol. Flag, acknowledge, escalate. The station commander has to act on it. It's not discretionary. It's charter mandated." "How long?" "Depends on what assets they have in range. A fast patrol vessel could reach this system in 24 hours. A full response group, 72. If they have nothing nearby and need to divert from another assignment, longer." Mrs. Smith nodded. She went back to her place against the wall. 6 hours and 55 minutes after Henner's transmission, the receiver LED changed color, amber to green. He looked at the LED. He looked at it for 3 full seconds, because a man who has spent 30 years in communications does not react to a signal change until he is certain it is real, and not noise, and not a ghost, and not his own exhaustion telling him what he wants to hear. Green. He pressed the receive key. A signal. Band 7. Terran military encryption. Automated response format. Not a voice, not a message. Just a structured data packet in the format used by Terran Corridor Authority rapid response units when acknowledging a distress call and confirming dispatch. The packet contained 4 fields. Field 1, acknowledgement code. It matched his original distress header exactly. Field 2, primary response ETA, 24 hours. Field 3, forward asset designation. Daggerpoint Garrison, 3rd Expeditionary. Field 4, forward asset arrival estimate, 14 hours. Fast frigate Harlan Cole. Henner read the frigate name twice. Then he looked up. "Signal received," Henner said. "Fast frigate Harlan Cole, ETA 14 hours. "The Cole," Terrence said. "You know the ship?" Cray asked. "I know the ship." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The way he said it, not with relief, not with comfort, but with the grim, knowing satisfaction of a man who has just learned that a very specific instrument has been pointed at a very specific problem, said everything. 14 hours later, Harlan Cole held orbit over a world that read as dead. Shuttles burned through thinning ash and set down across the fused plain. Teams deployed in expanding search grids, scanners sweeping glass that had once been gardens and stone walkways. 200 meters from the shattered water tower, a pulse came back wrong. Subsurface void. Artificial geometry beneath the melt layer. "Cut here," the ranking officer ordered. Thermal lances scored the glass. The surface cracked open in glowing seams. Beneath it, darkness breathed warm air up through the wound. A light flickered below. Chemical. Human. "Identify," the officer called down. Amos Cray's voice rose through dust and echo, calm, measured, oxygen concentrator ticking faintly behind him. "Amos Cray, 4 with me, multiple structural collapses, others deeper in the network. Unknown condition." A pause. "Alive?" "Last contact, yes. We lost sections." The officer swallowed whatever reaction tried to surface. Ropes went down. Medics followed. Cray came up first, thin and upright despite the damage. Mrs. Smith followed, coat gray with dust, knitting bag empty at her side. Tarrant was lifted in his chair, suspension locking automatically as it cleared the breach. Henner climbed last, one hand steady on the cracked wall, as if memorizing it. When his boots touched glass, he looked up at the shuttles and said nothing. Cray stepped toward the officer. "There are 49 total," he said evenly. "Rollins and Ash held the junction deeper east. If the southern branch collapsed the way I think it did, they'll be cut off." The officer turned sharply. "New grid, east quadrant, subsurface sweep, move!" Another shuttle shifted position. Ground teams advanced across the glass and began cutting a second breach, where scanners showed density fluctuations beneath fused strata. The surface split again. This time, the first thing visible was a hand reaching toward the light. Rollins emerged with his arm in a sling, stained dark, silver hair powdered white. The remnant of a smile crossed his face when he saw the uniforms. Behind him, Ash came up silent and steady, scanning the horizon out of habit. Then the others, wounded, exhausted, alive. On the glass plane of a sterilized world, Terran soldiers helped them stand, and above them, the sky was no longer empty. Epilogue. The glass plane reflected the descending frigate like a blade in a mirror. Harlan Cole settled through the haze on controlled thrusters, hull scarred, guns live. Behind it, destroyers held high orbit. More signatures burned in system beyond them. The hatch opened before the dust finished settling. Captain Dominic "Doc" Mercer stepped down first. 65. Steel-haired, no helmet, no ceremony. His eyes found Rollins immediately. Rollins stood in a bathrobe, arm in a sling, ash whitening his hair, posture as composed as if he were attending a reception instead of surviving a bombardment. Mercer looked him over slowly. "Well," the captain said, "I thought you retired to wear suits." Rollins brushed glass dust from his sleeve. "Don't judge a man by his attire, Doc. I was proving I still fit in one." A beat. Mercer's mouth twitched. "I'm glad you're alive, old friend." "Likewise." They clasped hands and held it there. Behind Rollins, Tarrant rolled forward on reinforced wheels. Mercer glanced between them. "Never knew you two knew each other." Tarrant adjusted the pulse lance across his lap. "We didn't advertise." Mercer lifted a hand in a clean military salute. "Good to see you, Tarrant." Tarrant returned the salute. "You're late." Mercer almost smiled. "Traffic." Tarrant jerked his chin toward the others. "Polk Henner," he said. "Built the transmitter that got your attention." Henner gave a small nod, already studying the frigate's hull like it was something he might take apart later. "Mrs. Edith Smith," Tarrant continued. "Author. The Whitfield Murders." Mercer blinked once. "My wife reads you." Mrs. Smith inclined her head. "I hope she skips the violent chapters." A faint breath of laughter moved through the soldiers. "And that," Tarrant said, "is Leonard Ash. His pottery was well regarded on Elysium 7. Ash said nothing, just watched Mercer the way he watched everything. Tarrant's gaze shifted. Amos Cray. Mercer's posture changed slightly at that name. Recognition. Respect. "And Deckard Rollins," Tarrant added. "You already know." Mercer looked at the group. Bathrobes, slings, dust. Oxygen line clicking steadily at Cray's side. "You survived orbital sterilization," he said quietly. Rollins shrugged. "We had a good card game going." "The cosmic card game,"